was going totally different than anything that the military experts have seen before. They knew war like it was fought during World War I. So relatively small movements of large quantities of soldiers and so on and so on. So they were thinking, they were planning, and they started an offensive to help the Poles. But the offensive towards Saarbrücken, mostly to provoke the Germans to counterattack, because the Germans, most of the army was in Poland, so the Germans were relatively weak in this area. But they were thinking basically that they have much time at their disposal, but they didn't. They had no time. They didn't consider that the Germans could use something like blitzkrieg, a new method of fighting. So the British were also thinking that they had much time at their disposal, and they were only harassing German convoys and some ships and some German aeroplanes over the Baltic, on the Baltic Sea. So that was mostly this and nothing more, but as I say, they thought that they had much more time. So the problem was not the lack of French help, and the French cowardice, alleged French cowardice, but the other circumstances. The other thing is that the French have performed relatively poor against the Germans in 1940 during their own defense war, but it was for another reason. Many French, they were also shocked and confused during the method the German used, because it was not only blitzkrieg but also some new form of blitzkrieg with the surprise attack through the Ardennes, the mountain chain of Ardennes. So they were surprised again, but everybody would have been surprised. So no wonder they lost, although they have more or less the same quantity of weapons as the German had. They have also given to the Land Normal Infantry Division a couple of tanks here, a couple of tanks there. They didn't form any panzer divisions as the Germans have created. So when the normal French division with a few tanks came across a German division with no tanks, the difference was very small. But when the normal French division, and there were no panzer division, no French panzer divisions, they came across the German panzer division, it was a massacre, and the Germans won. This is how it was going on in France, and so it was not the matter of cowardice, but it was the matter of tactics, and also a matter of the sabotage, because the French communists were supporting the Germans by sabotage and so on. It was not a decisive fact, the decisive factor of the war, but it was worth mentioning. Because the Germans, the Nazis and the communists, they were the Bolshevist communists, they were allies for this moment still. The French are lazy. Maybe it's because nowadays French and the Germans work together very often, and it's not about the laziness, but it's mostly about how the approach to the time, to the schedule is in both of those countries. For instance, the French employee would stay as long as it's required according to the schedule, although even if he has basically did what he was supposed to do on that day. The German would go home earlier. If he did everything earlier, he would be allowed, and he would be expected to go home earlier. So maybe because it's not happening among the French employees, the Germans assume that the French are not so good at making the portion of the work which is supposed to be done during the day, and when they see it, when they cooperate. The other reason is maybe the institution of the Inspecteur du Travail, the French authorities usually side with the employees, not the employers. And they assume at first that the employee has been harassed and persecuted by the employer. So there is a slightly lefty mentality here, but it's very often it turns out that it's the